right here. Say hi, Tracker. We are national now, so we're going to have people following us all the time, and that's fine, because our messaging has remained the same since we started. So I'm Carolyn Long, and I'm running to be Jamie Herrera Butler. Yay! We had a great night on Tuesday. A great night, and it's thanks to the volunteers, some of which are in this room, thanks to people who will continue to work for this campaign. It's all about voter contact, and that's through doorbelling, making phone calls, and so I really owe that to you. We're still behind. We've got room to grow, but having been in this race only 8 months, and to have that sort of a result is absolutely astonishing. But I knew it. I knew it before I launched this campaign, that there was discontent with the current incumbent and her lack of presence in the community, and also real concern with some of the policies of the Republican Party, including that of the incumbent. So I wasn't surprised by the results. My polling showed this would happen, and I can sense the energy in every one of my 32 town halls. I think this is number 33. These are live in-person town halls. I had an interview with the Columbia newspaper, and they brought up live town halls versus telephone town halls. And the incumbent said she does do live town halls. So maybe that's happening. If it is, I really implore you to go visit and ask the tough questions. So I want to do a quick bio for those of you who are meeting me for the first time. I want to speak a little bit about why I'm running, and then I want to leave it open to you and the questions you have, and also the concerns that you might want to articulate. So I introduced myself already. Just wanted to tell you a little bit about me. I grew up in rural communities in the Pacific Northwest. First in the Rogue River area, where my family was there for about 5 years, and then we moved to Brookings in a coastal community, not unlike Pacific County, which is in our district. My dad owned a small business, John's Fresh Produce. I worked there from the age 12 to 17. I'm certain he violated child labor laws at some point, but it was a real important time in my life, and it was important because I learned the value of hard work. I learned the importance of community because we interacted with people every single day. And I also learned about the struggles that small businesses face in rural parts of the country. So it was also important because my dad taught me a trade. He always told me he was teaching me the produce trade. I didn't know there was a produce trade. But it came in handy because I wanted to go to college, and I was able to ultimately pay for college by working at Safeway, and I worked my way up to be a journeyman at Safeway in 3 years. So I had a family wage job at the age 21. A journey person, thank you. A union person. By the age 21, I was a union person, and just short of being vested because I ended up going to graduate school. But I point that out because I strongly believe in unions and what they can do for workers in America and how we can get those family wage jobs. Went back east for graduate school, came back every summer to work in the store, and at that time we had purchased a small farm, so working a little bit in the dirt. But again, that was an important time in my life because of the connection to community. I've been teaching at for 23 years at Washington State University, Vancouver. Go Cougs! For some of us. And I think that's important. Teaching in Washington State University for 23 years. So that has been made an issue in this campaign, but the reality is I've taught thousands of students, and I get to see the world through their eyes every year that I was teaching. I'm on unpaid leave. In fact, many of you probably know Dave Van Kuren. I taught him my first or second year, and then I taught his daughter 10 years later. So I've been in the community, working with community organizations, and also being awarded for some of my work that I did with my Initiative for Public Deliberation, where I teach students to be neutral facilitators and to go into communities and to facilitate civil conversations about difficult issues. And that's so important in our toxic political environment where negativity seems to trump civility and we are unable to work with one another on those important issues. So that sort of led me to where I'm at today. There are a couple of reasons why I started thinking about running for office. One is I've studied political institutions all my life, and I've been quite disappointed at the polarization in Congress and the demonization of the other that we see all the time. And then very concerned about the Congress's inability to check an executive branch that I think is out of control. Yeah. And you can't just always support the president because of party. You've got to be able to act as that constitutional check. That's why we have checks and balances. That's how the system was designed to operate. And I'm getting a little weary of the complicity of the Republican Party on this issue. Also really concerned about policy issues that I think are going to come up in our conversation today, and the fact that I think that they are not being given the right attention or the bipartisan solutions that I think will solve these problems that plague our country. So I think those are going to emerge from the conversation. I just want to quickly say that I find these incredibly rewarding opportunities for me to learn more about you, and I love live town halls because we get to interact. This is, I think, my 5th one in Longview, or maybe 6th one in the Longview-Kelso area. I will continue, obviously, to do these if elected for office, as every representative should, because, again, I welcome the opportunity to see you, and if elected, when elected, to look you in the eye. Positive thinking. When elected, to look you in the eye and to tell you how I voted the way I did. And I can tell you right now, we're probably not going to be in alignment on 100% of the issues. And sometimes there'll be minor differences, and sometimes there'll be bigger differences. But when I do cast that vote that you don't like, I want to be able to look you in the eye and tell you why I voted that way. I want you to tell me why I'm wrong. So that interaction is what drives our democracy, and that interaction is what I'd like to see tonight. So with that, I'm going to open it up for you. No screened questions here. It's all about you asking me what you want to ask. I don't have my notes with me, so I'll try to be as specific as possible and also let you know if I don't know the answer. And if you could tell me again who you are, because I can't remember all of your names even though I try, before you ask the question, and where you're from, I'd appreciate it.
My name is Melissa Wilkie, and I'll just kick it off. I live just west of town,
Yeah.
and I always said necessity is the mother of invention, and this isn't new. And you talked about the being able to have a dialogue. So climate change is huge for me, and I don't understand, and solar and wind power and all of these things. Why don't we embrace them and use them as ways to create family wage jobs? And I mean, it's huge. So talk about that.
So first, obviously, climate change is real and it's human caused. I can't believe I ever have to start with that statement.
Right.
But in this era of fake news, it seems like we have to. We definitely have to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels. It's going to take a little time. I think renewables only account for 4% of global energy, and a lot of that is overseas. They're more advanced in certain countries than we are. So that's got to be the direction we move in. And clean energy projects are something that we should embrace, and something that's happening in Washington State. Unfortunately, it's happening in the Seattle area. So we need to really encourage those jobs to come down here, encourage those projects to come down here to create those family wage jobs. And I'll do my best to make sure that that can happen. It's incentivizing businesses, showing them that we're not going to be dependent on coal and other forms of fossil fuels for very much longer. So an investment now in clean energy will have payoffs, because that's the direction we're heading in.
There have to be huge lobbies in coal and oil. I mean, how do you buck the trend?
Yeah, first, I don't take any corporate PAC money. I think that's one thing. If you don't take corporate PAC money, you're not going to feel beholden to those industries. The second thing is, I think we have to call attention to people who do and how they vote on projects. So whether there's a direct link or not might be something we have to have a conversation about. But saying this person protects the fossil fuel industry and they have $300,000 in corporate PAC money, I think we can connect the dots. So I think that's another thing that we can do. So I would start there. And you know, we have to look long term at campaign finance reform to address the role of money in politics and the role of lobbying in politics, at least in terms of the money they give, not necessarily the advice, because sometimes they provide information representatives want.
Right.
What are your thoughts?
I'm in total agreement, and I don't understand how we can have a conversation about that we don't have the fish in the river that we used to, but we're not going to get rid of the dams when we have wind and solar. And why don't we maximize the things that are less intrusive to our environment? And I just want to see us move forward. And I know that's controversial, and that.
Well, I think it's how we move forward, right? Which is, that's where I talk about transitioning and knowing it's not gonna happen overnight, but we have to start somewhere. And that bringing those projects down is one route. I know the gentleman's got a question in the back.
Obviously you're against coal, but just take that site.
Yeah,
Two of the arguments against Millennium going there are increased river traffic, which if that's a viable argument, you're telling Kalama, Vancouver, Portland, you can't develop business. And then increased rail traffic. They're saying you can't increase the rail traffic because of congestion and everything. If that's a viable argument, you're saying nothing can go there and nothing, Barlow Point can't be developed. Are those viable arguments against Millennium?
so first of all, for the people standing, we have seats here, if you wanna come sit down, okay. It's gonna be a long 90 minutes. Maybe just for me.
Let me ask.
Yeah, of course.
I give you kudos for running for office. Anybody that wants to run for office, more power to you. You're gonna go through a lot.
Yeah, well, you gotta fix, something, you can't look yourself in the mirror. My students would come to me complaining about things, and I would ask them, what are you gonna do about it? It got to the point where I'd ask myself, what are you gonna do about it? And where I think a lot of people being involved for the first time are asking themselves that question. On Millennium, so I don't have a position on that project as a federal employee, because this is a state issue, and it goes through a state permitting process, and state legislatures will be the ones to ask about that in terms of whether or not it should come here or shouldn't come here. What I've said is that I'd like to decrease reliance on fossil fuels, so you can sort of see in that comment how I might feel about Millennium, but I think that my role as a representative is to shift us to moving towards clean energy projects instead. But you seem to not like the arguments against it, so
The
I'd like to
arguments
give you
against,
some time.
whatever development might go there. If coal gets pushed away, the arguments seem to say you can't develop the property. And I find that hard to believe. If we're going for good jobs,
Yeah,
I disagree with part of the argument.
sure. And I would say, I think that the labor unions, and somebody can correct me, are split on the issue of Millennium in terms of their support. So, obviously they are family wage jobs. So if we don't encourage those, we have to encourage something else. And what I hear in your comment is you think that given that particular site, you don't see other opportunities for jobs?
If the argument is Millennium shouldn't go there because of increased river traffic and increased rail traffic, you're shutting those sites down for whatever might happen to come.
So I'm not familiar with that argument. I think that there are more environmental concerns about Millennium.
That's two of the stated arguments against Millennium going there.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with that, because I've heard concern about the environmental impact statement with Millennium is what I have been hearing.
I don't want to get too critical
go
because,
ahead.
Longview's one of the big, outside of Vancouver, Longview's your biggest next city.
Yeah.
And you don't understand the aspects of shutting down Millennium. And I'm not trying to sit here and say we should have coal, whatever it is. I'm afraid that they're trying to shut down any development.
Right, so, that's a good criticism of me. I'm running for federal office, I'm concerning myself with federal issues. And so if I'm not all up to date on Millennium, I apologize for that, I can get to it. That's a bit of a fair criticism, but you also have to look at what my role is as somebody representing the 3rd Congressional District, and it isn't Millennium. Let's open it up for a few more comments. The gentleman in the back and.
Okay, the Seattle has instituted a $15 minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the federal minimum wage is considerably less than that.
Yeah.
Okay, would you be in favor of trying to raise that up?
Sure, but I will say that given the differences in quality of life and what minimum wage is, having differences in terms of a Seattle metro area versus a rural community in, say, Kentucky, I think that's handled better on the state level. Do I think, which I think is in your question, the federal minimum wage is too low? Absolutely. But I don't know where we're at in terms of what is considered a good minimum wage. I'd rather have that handled at the state level because of the differences in income. It's interesting to have Seattle have a much higher one than the rest of the state. I don't know if that's necessarily the best way to approach it.
Housing is.
It is, but it's also bad in Vancouver, it's bad in Longview, it's bad in rural areas. But that's my argument for having it at the state level rather than the federal level. Gentleman in the
The dialogue shifted, so I'll pass.
Okay.
Yes, I'm Joe Brewer from Longview. And Carolyn, as I have campaigned throughout the district for several people, one of the things that I noticed is Pacific County,
Mhm.
Wahkiakum County, parts of Cowlitz County, parts of Grace Harbor. You can't even get a cell phone
Yeah.
signal. How are we going to get all of the industry down here when a business can't even operate because they can't get on the web?
Yeah.
How can you help
It's a
that?
great question. I called you Betty Joe because I know so many Betty Joes. It's a great question, Joe. Sorry for changing your name. I believe we need to invest millions of federal dollars in high-speed broadband internet, not only to have that connectivity to the rural areas, but so it opens up business opportunities for individuals who might be able to rely on the internet either to get education, additional training, or perhaps run a business. So I think that is something that should be a federal government obligation. It's something that we can do. It's something Washington State tried to do at the state level, but it didn't pass the state legislature. That is the type of infrastructure project we need to invest in.
It needs to happen on a federal level.
Absolutely.
Because there's not enough resources locally to put that infrastructure in there.
Right.
And I would really appreciate that on your priority.
Absolutely, I'd like to champion it, and also other types of unique ways of providing people that access. So the Port of Ridgefield was looking at investing themselves as a private port in dark fiber in order to increase connectivity and competition for people who want to get to the internet. And so there are things like that that can happen as well with the federal government's encouragement in terms of low interest loans or no interest loans and things like that. So there are a couple of different ways that directions we can go to bring that to the rural areas. But they're struggling and that they would benefit.
They are.
Do you have
Yeah.
an explanation about what dark fiber is? That's a new
Oh,
term.
I'm sorry, it's where, what, you guys don't know what dark fiber is? You should be informed for your town halls. It's where where the fiber is laid down, but it's not lit, meaning they don't turn it on. Rather, they rent space within the fiber to private industry, so like to Comcast and CenturyLink. And so what they're doing is they're making money off the leasing of the access to fiber, which provides connectivity. So what it also does is it creates competition among the telecom companies, because if you lease it to 6 companies, then they're gonna try to bid lower for the consumer.
Thank you.
And the good thing about it is it provides revenue to the ports. So ports, and we see this now with this terrible trade war I hope we can talk about, ports need to generate income, and a lot of their income can be unstable depending on like trade circumstances, and that would provide a stable source of revenue. So now I'm ready with the
Okay,
general.
so I just had a question regarding the leasing arrangements with the dark fiber.
Yeah.
So does that give the port then access to the data that those private companies are transmitting over their infrastructure?
God, I hope not. So, yeah, that's a great question. Sort of privacy concerns, which we should all be alarmed about. I would hope not, but when Russians are trying to steal our elections, I don't know. Let me look into that. That's a great question. I hadn't thought about it. Gentleman back, and they'll come back over here.
Yeah, Jim.
Jim.
Carolyn, 3 out of 4 people didn't even vote in the primary. But the total Democratic vote was at least as big as the total Republican vote.
1.5% difference, yeah.
Yeah, well, who's counting?
Yeah.
What are you doing to close ranks with your fellow competitors of the Democratic side to try to shore that up?
Sure, great question, Jim. So the first thing I did was make a call to the campaigns of David McDevitt and Dorothy Gask in hopes of reaching out to them to find out how I can earn their support, and I look forward to hearing from them. I also had an unexpected surprise on primary night when Michael Courtney came to my primary night and thanked me for my race and said he was going to publicly endorse me as a Republican. So I think that there is opportunity not only within the Democratic Party, but also within the Republican Party to come to Team Long. And I think it's because of my message of wanting to cooperate and not demonize the other side and not play dirty tricks is a message that's resonating regardless of political party. And my message of party people over politics is really about how we have to serve the people and not just serve people with a D or an R or an I or whatever after their name. So I reached out to the campaigns, hoping to hear from them, and then really inviting people who supported other Democrats to come hear me speak, or I can go to them so we can have a positive message and welcome them into the fold. And people are already coming, which is nice. But there's a separate problem, which is the people who are not registered and the people who are not actually voting. So it's not just the people who voted and winning them over, how do we expand the electorate? The Democratic Party is all about expanding the electorate, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why the state legislature had a series of measures and why Governor Inslee gave us a free stamp. You know, they want to get people to vote as much as possible. The Republican Party, on the other hand, not so much about expanding the electorate. It's about a little bit of voter suppression, and not allocating money to make sure our elections are safe and secure from the Russians. So I think we had to look at what the party is bringing in terms of trying to make it easier for people to be registered. Because we're all registered, I imagine. Is anybody not or recently registered? If you talk to somebody who was not registered, sometimes they talk about barriers. Recently moved, didn't know where to go. So sometimes the smallest things stop somebody from going down that path to being an active citizen. So we have to ease those barriers as much as possible. Do you have suggestions as well?
No, I have an unfair follow-up.
Okay.
Are you getting support from the National Committee?
The
Yeah.
DCCC? So no, the DCCC has said that they have moved us to the red to blue list, which means what they are doing is they have identified this as one of 66 seats that are nationally competitive. And what they do is they sort of highlight our races, and they could provide support in terms of staffing and things like that, but they have not yet done that.
How can we help?
Donate to the campaign is always good. I hate to be so crass about it, but her Butler's got a lot more money than I do. But the other thing is really being here and bringing, like John. Where did John? Oh, John left.
John left.
Okay,
He had
John.
a dinner engagement.
Okay, John brought you guys here. So, oh, he didn't. You came anyway. Okay. Didn't even bring
Well,
somebody
no,
new. Didn't even bring. Okay, Twyla brought her husband here. So it's also about bringing people to hear our message, and then it's about volunteering. We have 1,000 volunteers. 1,000 volunteers. Now they're not all doing it every day, but we knocked on. Oh boy, I'm gonna get this wrong.
33,000.
33,000 doors.
That's what I heard.
Yeah, I think there were 24,000 phone calls and 20,000 texts. Those are our volunteers working for the campaign. Because the best way to get somebody on a campaign is direct voter contact. So it's this, but it's also interacting with our volunteers. Michael back there is our Cowlitz County field guy. And so reach out to him, and he'd be happy to put you to work. Thanks for that. Right, that was an offer, right, Jim? Okay.
Michael,
All right,
back me up.
I've ignored this side of the room now. Okay, let's go back. Yes,
So-
how you doing, Peter?
Good. So when you get elected, you're going to have a district that has winners and losers. Unfortunately, I think we're the losers.
Yeah. You mean Cowlitz or the third congressional
The
district?
Cowlitz versus Vancouver and Clark County is
Yeah.
doing very well, thank you. So what are you going to be able to do to redistribute? Personally,
Yeah.
you know, I'm a big government person.
Yeah.
I love taxes.
This guy's gotta get you on tape.
But what are you going to do? Because we used to have a divide in Washington State
Yeah.
between the East and the West.
Yeah.
We now have a divide between Puget Sound and everywhere else.
Yeah.
Although Vancouver, Clark County is sort of part of Portland.
Right.
So what are you going to do for us here in Cowlitz County?
Yeah, so let me first sort of confirm what you're feeling, which is that in urban rural districts like this one, there's an urban rural divide. And there, it is sort of Vancouver and the rest of the counties, but also concerned about everything goes to Seattle. So we talk about clean energy projects, they're all in the Seattle area. They're not coming down here. So as your federal representative, I will try to encourage projects to come down here by incentivizing them, but also calling attention to rural communities' needs. And this is something that I think the president has really capitalized on, which is people's insecurity economically, and sort of saying that it's because of people who are immigrating into the United States, both legally and illegally, without looking at it. A lot of it is because we don't have family wage jobs in these areas. We have service jobs in a lot of these rural communities, and those aren't family wage jobs. We have jobs in Pacific County that are even seasonal, so it's worse, minimum wage and seasonal. So it's about how do we bring new industries, and I think we have to be creative. But the other thing that we have to do as a country, not just the 3rd congressional district, is look into the future. One of the reasons why we've lost so many family wage jobs is because of automation. And we're not talking about automation and artificial intelligence, and we have to, because we have to look at what the job force is going to look like, 10 years down the line. Think about what the job force was like 10 years ago or 20 years ago, when manufacturing was so powerful. We're losing those jobs. So how do we look into the future and bring those jobs here? The other thing that I'm very strongly in favor of are apprenticeships. I think that we have to have multiple paths to career success. I'm somebody who's in higher education. I can tell you now, some people shouldn't be in higher education in terms of the students, but they're told that they have to go to college to be successful. There are many business trades, there are many trades, building trades, where if you can get an apprenticeship, earn while you learn, you've got a great pathway to success in terms of jobs. So how do I use federal money to encourage that? How do I use my standing as a member of the Washington delegation to not only work collaboratively with Washington, well, I hope are all Democrats except for one. How do I get them to say, listen, you've had your turn, we need to pay attention to the third. And that's about just telling them how hard things are. They've got their own struggles, their own counties, but emphasizing that. And also working with the Oregon delegation on issues that affect both states. We're in a bi-state area, you mentioned that yourself. And I think it takes a special kind of legislator to reach not only within your party and across the aisle in your party, but across the river as well. So it's a little vague here, but I will use my position as much as I can to try to bring those jobs. And also to lower restrictions to bringing those jobs to areas, because sometimes it's because of unfair regulation, and that alarms some businesses. But there are many ways that you can create a favorable economic climate. And some of my work with CREDC reflects that. I forgot your name. Terry.
I live in Longview, and earn my living programming automation, so I'll just throw that out there. Automation is not going away.
Yeah.
Right.
To be competitive in this world global market, you've gotta have it. Because everybody's splitting the same nickel. The problem I saw with that though was the lack of an educated workforce. So what have you got any plans around that?
Yeah, so the main role, and this is where it gets difficult, sort of like the industrial project I was asked for with education. So most of what's done with federal, at the federal level for higher education is federal money.
Right.
So we try to provide federal money at the direct student level so they can have the means to go to college. And what we've seen in Washington State, like many, is state dollars have declined and tuition just goes up. And I saw this firsthand as a university professor. You know, I see firsthand the struggles of my students. I have students drop out the first week because they couldn't get a loan, or they didn't realize books were so expensive. And it's heartbreaking because they're there trying to help themselves. So I think what we can do is increase the amount of federal dollars in the Pell Grant program, which really helps those who are very, lower socioeconomic
I got a Pell Grant in college.
I got one too. I got Pell Grants my first year, which is why I started working towards the end of it. And then for families who don't meet the requirements, which I think we should take a look at them, and I'll tell you why in a second, low interest or no interest student loans.
Yes.
So this is a terrible story, and don't hold it against me because I made this decision 23 years ago. But I wanted to buy our first home, and we didn't qualify because my federal student loan payment was like $900. This is just from graduate school, and $66,000 that I had borrowed. I moved it to a 30-year payment period rather than a 10-year payment period.
Oh, wow.
I owe $44,000. Wow. So all of that money for 23 years, absent $20,000, has been going to pay the bankers who have the loans. That should not happen now. So if we could do something like that, that will help those who need those loans to be not nearly as onerous. So those are two things that I think are important. It's also to recognize that there are groups of individuals who are, they don't make enough to get the Pell Grant, or they make too much to get the Pell Grant, and then the only option they have are loans, and that is not an option at all because they'll be saddled with tens of thousands of dollars. So let's take a look at where those benefits go to make sure anybody who wants access to higher education can do so. So that would be great. In the back, yes, and then I'll come here and then there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jerry from Longview. I'm also in education, but at the high school level, and I remember this circular black hole argument that, with the Chamber of Commerce and with various industries saying, well, we're not bringing those industries here because we don't have the educated workforce here that you need. How do you keep educated people here? I mean, I counseled my students to get out of town all the time because this wasn't the place that they could survive and thrive. So how do we break that circular black hole that seems to not ever produce anything of any great
That's
value?
kind of a win-win.
And again, I think that's a federal level. That's something that affects people at WSUV. I mean, it affects a huge.
Well, and it's also not just the rural areas or sort of the industrial counties like Cowlitz. It's also Clark County. I mean, you can't get an engineer in Clark County, and that's why the pay is gone up, particularly in software. We're producing them at the university. We're
Right.
doing as much as we can, but the demand is so much higher that they have to go out of state in order to do the hiring. So what you're showing is that there's a brain drain, right?
Yes,
And then there's a difficulty in bringing back an educated workforce.
or,
So-
yeah.
So how do we grow them ourselves? Part of
Well,
it
we
is
grow
access to
them, but
higher.
then how do we have something here for them to do when they're grown? Cause I say, bye-bye, honey, you know?
Well, we don't wanna say bye-bye to them, because they're members of our community.
But we want them to be successful and the opportunities for them are not here.
Yeah. You have to bring business and industry to a community. You have to have a good
Right, so
economic
those
climate.
businesses are saying, we're not coming here until, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's a chicken and the egg.
It
really
is,
It's a chicken and the egg.
you know, I never heard anybody resolve that in any satisfactory way or come up with solutions that were going, but that I think has to be addressed somehow at a federal level too.
Well, one of the things we did do is address the education issue at a state level. One of the reasons why we have Washington State University in Vancouver, you know, in
Right.
the Tri-Cities, is and in Spokane, and now in Everett, is that we found that students didn't have access to higher ed. It was too prohibitively expensive to move away. So if you open up a branch campus, you allow students to live at home while they go to college. So part of it is bringing higher education to the communities. We're blessed with several great community colleges that do offer that training. I think partnering up with
I
industry.
was gonna say, are they having those important conversations with industry?
They are, and in fact, one of the things somebody told me about a proposed energy project, the methanol project, what I'm sure you're gonna ask me about, is that they were gonna partner with the community college to make sure that the workers were trained here in this county in order to avoid bringing people in. I think that's a fabulous idea,
Yes.
because it shows the commitment of the industry to the community college, and also creates those jobs for people who are here. So there are those types of things that can happen. You know, we have a strong economic development group here in Cowlitz County, and they are always trying to explore ways to bring business and industry here. And you're right, they look at educated workforce, they look at affordable housing, they look at the price of living. I mean,
Which I think would make us pretty attractive.
it's a great county, yeah. And it's a county also with needs too, so it's a win-win for them, so there are lots of little things, but it's not easy, it really isn't easy, so we have to just try to create the proper environment. I'm just a second, did I miss some? Okay,
No,
so I think it's
thank
you, no, it was you, and then you're next, and then you're next. Sorry, thank you, I'm usually good at queuing it up, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm one of the younger people here. I think I was the first year millennial. I graduated high school in the year 2000. And I wouldn't say I'm an educated, I'm supposed to be the educated in the workforce, but nobody considers me educated, or nobody's giving me the jobs. And certainly the jobs that I am getting, can't get me into the lowest cost department. I graduated and I kept my GPA high enough to go to grad school, but at this point I'm so frustrated with the way industrial capitalism has been working, I really just want to leave it. I like the Mother Earth magazines and the outdoorsman. I want to live off the grid, and because if you're not going to pay me to buy a house, I don't want to participate. I would rather not buy things and be a minimalist. But because that's just the experience. And the only reason I'm not homeless is because I have a housing voucher, and I'm very privileged to have that housing voucher, which was passed by the Democrats back in, I believe it was 06. It might have been 08. But the majority of people, just like me, are homeless because they don't have access to the
that process takes place. The other thing, and I would say this is a problem with the tax bill, is that you want to have it be a collaborative process. I do not like straight party line votes, even if it's straight Democrats. You should never have legislation which is purely from one party. The best tax reform approach is what happened in 1986 when you had Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan sitting down and hammering out the details, a Democrat and a Republican, because you had all of Americans' interests represented. What we have now is with one party control, it's just Republican Party interests represented. So one of the ways that we can do that is, elect people to office who are of a different political party, and I'm not just talking about my race, but throughout the country, but little legislative fixes like that. And to use the rules committee to make sure that things get out of committee. That's the other thing is, oftentimes like we talked about healthcare, there's a question about healthcare, there are fixes for the ACA that Mitch McConnell, he's not getting out of committee. And they enjoy bipartisan support, so you've got your own party members who are Republican who can't stand up to Mitch McConnell. So people over politics, let's not have so much power in the hands of leadership, because it takes it out of the hands of representatives, and let's have fixes like that 72-hour rule that Brian championed. The first thing I'm gonna do is join the Problem Solvers Caucus too. There's a caucus in Congress where you join and you bring a Republican with you, and it forces a conversation about the problems, not about your political parties or the labels, which are the labels after your name. So there are little things like that.
I'm Matt, I'm from Longview. My concern in Cowles County is, it's not really a concern, but it concerns me, is the Democrats. It appears that we're turning more red in this county because of the coal and the chemical plants. Because it's becoming a problem, and I didn't hear you speak very well about that. You're just like, well, that's not my problem, because it's a local issue. But I feel that's what's been pushed us more towards becoming Republican here, is because it's just like our answer to everything that comes here is no. Like, oh, that's dirty, oh, that's dirty, and I get it, okay, I don't want a coal, I just don't want a coal plant, here in that, but but if we keep saying no, we're just gonna get more red. On industry, because people see that as jobs, they see it as opportunities, and they just see that we are just not supporting anything. So as being the representative, if I canvass for you, I wanna know, so how are we gonna address that issue? Because I think that is the biggest issue that is causing us to turn red.
Well, and I've got another theory that I want to throw and see if you agree with it. And I know how unsatisfactory it is for me to say it's not my issue, because I usually answer any question even like, what's the best beer that you like? Even if it's not relevant. But on those particular projects, and I know that this will be unsatisfactory to some people in the room, the Department of Ecology has a very specific process that it uses to provide permitting. And so we have to rely on that agency to do the permitting. And if it's a project that should go forward because it gets the permits, who am I as a federal representative to say I think that that's the wrong project? So that's how I want to explain myself in terms of not taking a position. I think processes should be protected, and my understanding is that ecology is pretty strict in what it allows to move forward, and it should be, because they're looking out for our environment, and that's equally important. And so I also hear you saying that the Democrats are often saying no, and so what I hear is actually the tension, not between the party, but between environmental groups, and then labor groups, which are in favor of many of these projects, and then people who want to have those jobs. So I think that might be the tension a little bit more than the party.
So there's a relationship.
There is, and that's why even on the issue of labor, you have the Democrats who are, they're split on some of these issues. So I guess I would just move it back a little bit to say the tension exists in other respects. One answer is to encourage different types of projects. And, it's not easy. It's really not easy. We have the chicken and the egg problem identified about education and training. We've got tremendous needs in this county. I think we just have to refocus to more rural and suburban communities, because they're the ones struggling the most. You asked about priorities. I want to go to where the needs are the greatest, because I see it in this district all the time. It doesn't mean it's not in the urban district, but it certainly is in these counties. So I'll work on it,
I don't know, I just said that's a problem I see, the appearance of that is.
Well, there's also let me just introduce my alternative. Sorry, I had another theory. Is Seattle? There's a perception in Southwest Washington that, and this was somebody said this in the introduction, that Seattle drives the politics, and that all the resources are up in Seattle, and because all the people are there, and it's not coming to other parts of the state. So there's this tension between that very progressive urban area, sort of not allowing us to prosper because the money isn't coming this way. We do have a strong state legislative delegation. We have strong Democrats running this year throughout Washington state. That's what we ought to pay equal amount of attention to, because they have a lot of control in terms of policy. Yes. Okay, where am I at with the queue? Raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Okay, 1, 2, 3. You're last because you asked one. Okay. Sorry. We have 90 minutes, sir.
I'm Andy from Longview. My question is about gun control legislation. I think it needs to be federal, because it does no good to pass good laws in Illinois when Indiana's just a day for the way.
So gun safety comes up a lot, particularly after we had some violence in the schools. Let me begin by saying I support the Second Amendment, but like all amendments to the Constitution, it's not without some types of restrictions on it. And for people who say that it shouldn't be restricted, sort of don't understand how we've constructed these constitutional amendments through the courts. I believe that there are gun safety measures that enjoy wide bipartisan appeal. We see that in Washington state. background checks, fully funding them so that we'll make sure that the states and the local governments aren't burdened. Bans on things like a bump stock, closing the 4 or 5 gun show loopholes that exist. All of those things enjoy bipartisan support. In Washington State, and this is where it gets tricky, right? Because I agree that some things need a federal solution. Washington State is the leader in gun safety measures about people who are red flags, like folks who engage in domestic violence, and that in people who are adjudicated mentally ill. And those were ballot initiatives that passed. They weren't legislation. Those were ballot initiatives. And the reason why I want to highlight that is it shows that 2/3 of Americans and 2/3 of Washingtonians are in favor of some of these gun safety measures. What you're referring to, though, is the fact that conceal and carry can happen. And so you can go to the state with the least restrictive gun laws, and you can bring the gun, you can travel with it. So that's what you're saying when you say it requires a federal solution. Am I hearing you right?
No,
Okay.
I think it doesn't do any good to have gun restriction laws in this state when you can bypass them by going to that state and getting your guns and come back.
Yeah. So that you want federal laws that are similar to stop it. I think the federal measures are, for all issues that require like movement of commerce and goods, you do need that federal measure. So I'm very much in favor of federal safety measures. The other thing, when we talk about gun safety, I think it's also important to speak about how many gun deaths are from suicides. And there are many gun deaths for people who die at the hands of their intimate partners. So handguns account for, I think it's 50 or 30, 50? I think it's 50 handgun deaths a month by mostly women for their intimate partners. So we've got to recognize where the gun violence is happening. I know we focus often on schools, but we should study gun violence. And we can do that now because we just repealed the Dickey Amendment, which said that we couldn't study gun violence. Now we have to fund those studies, because what I would like to do, and this comes from my academic background, is make sure the social science sort of dictates what gun safety measures we should pursue at the federal level, because we want them to be effective. And we only know that they're effective if we can study it. So those are some of my thoughts. Do you have thoughts? You said federal legislation. Anyone in particular that you're concerned with?
I'd like to see the crime bill come back to begin with.
And that provided for additional funding for police officers as well, didn't it?
Yeah.
So I was going to go to you, but you had a question.
I had another
That's
question.
okay, and then
It
you have
seems
a
like
question,
there's
and
more
then
questions
we'll
on
come
the
back.
coal issue.
Say it again.
I have a question, but I was gonna rake you over the coal some more. So if anyone has questions. Coal now.
Rake me. Tell me I'm wrong.
I'm back to coal. So I'm James Hamilton from Longview. So it seems like most of the debate on the coal plant so far is focused on local business and environmental issues. As a federal representative, I'm more interested in your issues or your thinking on the coal plant as with regards to foreign policy, because my understanding is that the coal terminal is primarily to export coal to U.S. allies in the Pacific, such as South Korea, Japan, and potential U.S. allies like India, who are currently burning, like India particularly, burning dirty brown coal right now. A really grade of coal that we're proposing to sell to them would be, it's not clean, it's still coal, but it's cleaner than what they're burning and wouldn't have as much production. So that's, I think, more of like a federal issue because it's dealing more with foreign policy.
Are you talking about exporting?
Yeah, exporting the coal.
Okay, as a foreign policy issue. So you would say that because, or are you making climate change? I think you're making actually a climate change argument as well.
Because climate change is a huge foreign policy issue because other countries are suffering more from climate change than we are, and obviously are contributing to varying degrees as compared to the U.S., which is a major leader.
Yeah, and that's why they're using coal, because it's also a cheaper form of fuel and all that. But you want me to speak about it as a foreign policy issue?
Just if you have any thoughts on it.
So I see it as a climate change issue a little bit more than foreign policy. I do think that the way we use energy in America contributes obviously to climate change, which contributes to foreign policy problems. So let me try to see if I can get to where you're at.
Yeah.
If you look at the severe droughts that we're seeing in certain parts of the world, and then the extreme temperature changes that we're seeing, even in New York they're having terrible flooding, right? That could be connected to climate. So if countries are suffering from droughts and they have poor agricultural yields, that's going to create dire straits, which then is connected to climate. So I would say the way we use fossil fuels affects climate, which affects foreign policy because it increases tensions in areas in which that climate change is making it too hot to feed your communities and things like that. So that's why I would say climate change is one of the biggest issues facing the world because of that connection to foreign policy. So that's how I think about it. And in fact, there was one questionnaire I answered, and they said, what are the 3 biggest foreign policy threats? And I put climate change down as one of them for that reason. Now, how do we fix that? That's a little bit trickier, right? Because it's not something that can be fixed overnight. We need to do things like not leave the Paris Climate Accord. Work with our allies to deal with it on a regional basis. Do what I suggested earlier, which is to encourage clean energy. So those are all little things that will contribute to solutions that address that major issue. But also know it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time. And I really like something called the Climate Solutions Caucus in Congress. And it's like the Problem Solvers Caucus. A Democrat joins and has to bring a Republican with them, because it's there that you can have those really fruitful bipartisan conversations about policy solutions. So did you have a follow-up? Breaking me up.
Oh, well, as a counterpoint then, so rather than exporting coal, would you then favor the U.S. exporting more of its, clean energy knowledge and engineering?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. I think that, I mean, there are intellectual property issues, but I think we should definitely do that. I also think there's a lot that we can learn from other countries who are much more advanced on these issues.
Yes.
We're not necessarily the leaders, unfortunately.
So something you can do in the House then, try to propose bills or try to raise ruckus and noise to try to get other countries to agree to then take on more American engineers to work on these sorts of energy projects.
I think that's a fabulous idea.
Maybe tie it into AmeriCorps or something like that, where people going over to do the work.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, and also to be friendly with our allies. Our allies, our enemies.
There you go, thinking outside the box.
It's easier than I thought. Be friendly with your allies. But you give me stuff to think about. Thank you. Okay, so I think you were next for having a second question, and then I'll come to you, and then you. Is that right?
Oh, you better go over there, because I can't remember I had a question.
Yes.
So my question, well, it concerns the salmon.
Yes.
And the fact the sea lions are actually a negligible influence.
Yeah. Well, go ahead and then I'll.
There are much greater influences, and it would seem to me that focusing on the sea lions draws attention away from other more important issues.
Yes.
And like the fact that, we're still having this crisis about the salmon, but we do have, albeit reduced, fishing season still. And it would seem to me that before we go and shoot things to solve our problem, we could restrict our impact more.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, sorry, I was going to cut you off. So Brian Baird, we talked about him earlier, worked in a bipartisan fashion with Doc Hastings to pass the original bill, which allowed mediation for sea lion predation, where you got the bad ones, and you were able to move them or then get rid of them. But it was apparently a difficult process to go through. What Herrera Butler is doing, along with others on the Oregon side and also on the Washington side, is offer a bill that deals with sea lion predation. I'm in favor of that bill, actually. I do believe that we've made it onerous to deal with the issue. I still remember my one real day off. I went fishing at the end of the first quarter, and I caught 2. I had to give one back because it was native, and people were probably watching me, but it's also, it's also the right thing to do. As we continued fishing, we saw a sea lion following us because they wait, and then sometimes people will pull up half a salmon because they go after them. So I will say it's a problem. The estimates are that it's something like 40% of some runs. That said, where I wholeheartedly agree with you is that is only one type of a solution. We have bigger problems with ocean acidification. I mean, what's happening with our climate and what's happening to the ocean conditions, I agree, has a bigger impact on salmon than the sea lion. So we have to pay attention to that as well. Fully fund NOAA. We have to look at dam spill, which is when you spill the dam more water and the impact that it has on salmon. And Jamie Herrera Butler voted for a bill that would make that, wouldn't allow that in the way that's happening now. So there are what I hear you saying, which I agree with, is that there are various ways that we can address this problem. We shouldn't just solely focus on one. Is that accurate?
Well, I was more saying that we should explore other solutions before killing indigenous.
Oh, okay, so you would, yeah. So I think we disagree a little bit on this.
Well, I think also I've heard the sea lions called an invasive species, and that's just incorrect.
Yeah.
Because an invasive species would be like, yeah.
Thank you.
European rats brought to the colonies on ships.
Yeah.
These are animals that instead they follow their food source. Like,
Right.
that's where their food went. And it's because there's the salmon, there's fewer fish in the sea.
Right. So just two things that I've learned from, because we spend a lot of time thinking and talking about salmon. One is, my understanding is that there are just a few bad actors. I mean, there are some bad sea lions. And they come up and they feast because they're trying to power up. They're mostly bulls, so they can go back and they can create more sea lions. So there's a small number that do this for exactly the reason what you say, which is this is where the salmon are. But that's why going after those bad actors will make a difference, because it will decrease the number of them. The other thing is to look at the number of sea lions that were in existence when the Mammal Protection Act, I think I got it wrong, was passed versus now. When it was passed protecting them, there were like 10,000. Now there's like 300,000. So when they say it's a, what is the word you use? Invasive? It's because of the very large number, and that there's no need to protect them according to some people. So I think we disagree a little bit. I think it sounds like you like the sea lions and want to protect them, but it's difficult because in some respects we're choosing, and for people who fish, both recreationally and commercially, fishing is their livelihood. And so that's when you sort of look at the balance between them, and we may come to a different conclusion.
We do.
And then you're gonna tell me why I'm wrong, which is good, so that's good. Okay, you were next, and then, sorry, I forgot your name. Sherry.
So we've brought up women's health, and there's a couple things that are concerning to me. The Trump-Pence talk about the gag rule, taking away Title IX funding for anybody that offers abortions, even if it's a tiny percentage, and that just could ruin affordable health care for women. And then also with the Supreme Court nomination, Roe v. Wade getting overturned is a concern of mine as well. So I guess would you champion for women's rights? If so, how so?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. One of the problems with this setting is somebody will say, and this happened in somebody was very angry at me, and it was because I hadn't addressed issues that were important to him, and I think one was climate, one was food safety, and he was just like, "You're terrible, I'll never vote for you." And I was like, "You didn't ask me. It's not that I don't care." And so that's the problem with this format. If somebody doesn't ask, I don't have the opportunity. Of course, I'll be a champion for women. And I look at reproductive health as incredibly important, not just in terms of control over our body, but also control over our economic health. Because if we don't have access to reproductive health services, we are placed in a position where we've lost control over our ability to take care of ourselves independently. So very much a champion. You mentioned Title IX, same thing. Washington State did a really good job this past session on the issue of pay equality. Very excited about that. Should happen at the federal level. And then the final one you said was the Supreme Court. Gosh, okay. So one of my areas is public law. I am so sad that Congress has gotten so polarized that the Republicans stole a Supreme Court justice nominee and were able to do so. That is a theft. That is a theft. Yes.
Dirty tricks.
And then when the shoe's on the other foot, they want their nominee to go through quickly rather than waiting for an election. So I think we need to call it out for what it is, which is craven political opportunism by the Republicans to overturn Roe v. Wade, and the complicity of the Republican Party for that to happen. People are very frustrated with that because, you shouldn't resort to those dirty tricks in order to achieve a policy process. We should respect the rules that exist, and the cravenness of it is really disappointing. As a member of the House, there's not much I can do except support Democrats for the Senate so that if it comes to a vote for another Supreme Court justice, and I hope it's not Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but I really like, that they're able to use the rules that are in place to block it. But I really respect rules and institutional norms, so when I see them being exploited like that, it hurts my small D Democrat heart. Because we structured this government based upon a constitution that stands for separation of powers and checks and balances and not being manipulated and exploited by the people we hire to represent us. I will definitely fight for that.
You could vote for impeachment.
So is Melissa, I don't remember. Oh, Christine, sorry. Two more questions? Okay, so this has gotta be from two people who haven't asked a question, so Christine.
I was gonna ask just kind of a follow-up question on that, rules, committee that you mentioned, that's part of the Senate, right?
No, it's in the House.
Is it in the House?
Yeah.
So in what way, a lot of these things that we're kind of talking about, it sounds like it's like bending the rules or
Yeah.
manipulating the rules, and it's seems to have caused a lot of dysfunction in our government. What can you do if you get elected to really, assist in setting those things right?
So I had been saying that I wanted to be on the Rules Committee, because as a small d and a big D Democrat, the Rules Committee is a traffic cop for how legislation moves through. That could be one way that you influence process. It's not that I don't want to do it anymore, I just need to learn a little bit more about whether or not it's changed from my common understanding of the Rules Committee so that I could actually effectuate change, because if I can't, I don't want it. And I'm really attracted right now to the Education and Labor Committee, because that's what our district so desperately needs. So if I can't be on the Rules Committee, it's talking to leadership about how they have to call attention to the fact that they've been manipulated and try to change the rules. And they can do that if they're in control. If they're in the minority, they're a mess. They can't.
Can I just suggest also that the housing committee might be a good one, because it's kind of that triage of like the housing, labor, and education that kind of go together, but it's really, that all kind of makes help. Because if you're constantly stressed out about not having a job and not having a place to live.
And healthcare.
Yeah, then your health is deteriorating.
Yeah.
Because that you can't, constant cortisol stress.
Right.
It's not gonna help you.
No, it's a good suggestion. So one last question, it's gotta be a doozy. I'm gonna do two, because of this gentleman in the back. Go ahead. Sorry, Xavier.
I'm Christy from Longview, and I'm a former MPA student, and I have a question for Professor Long.
Wait, are you my former student?
I did not get to take your class.
Okay.
But yes, but anyway, so the news is sort of depressing and it's a little demoralizing. So as a government professor, how much of this damage can we repair and how long will it take? And I'm asking that because I'm hoping it will encourage us to get out the vote.
So, how can I save the Republic in 20 words or less? How long will it take? Listen, I think, it's so funny, I used to do commentary, and politicians would say this and I would mock them. This is the most important election in your lifetime. But you know what? This is the most important election in your life. So I think the first thing you do is try to get some order to our constitutional system by voting Democratic to put a check on this president. I can't say that enough. Having this complicity with the Republicans to the point that they don't even look like Republicans to me in some policy areas, I think is a problem. They aren't. Free trade? So I would start there because that's going to force bipartisanship. It's going to force compromise between the House and the Senate and both parties, and hopefully between the executive branch. And then we just have to restore civility to our public discourse. I mean, we are so bad, and it's not just elected officials, but we are so bad in our own communities and how we talk to people about politics. It really is terrible. It's uncivil, it's personal attacks, and so part of it is sort of widening your scope of friends, widening the people you talk about, and then listening to them with respect. So we disagree on sea lions. I want to hear what he has to say. I want him to talk to me about it, persuade me I'm wrong. I'm not going to demonize him, but there are people who will say, you're wrong, or you're stupid, or you're underinformed, or you're fake news. Fake news is the other thing. We shouldn't fall prey to that. We can be the better angels, So I would ask us all, independent of election, to look at what we can do in our own life to restore some normalcy in conversations about politics. And this means getting outside of our own bubbles, I married to a Republican. Okay, somebody called the office and said they're no longer supporting me because of that. And that's exactly the problem, right? But we're able to have conversations in a constructive way.
He's still voting for you, right?
No, he wanted all my platforms on these issues. I was like, I don't believe this. This is crazy. So, I don't know. I respect his independent approach. But we have to look at where we share common values and beliefs. And so don't start the conversation by I'm right, you're wrong. Let's start by what, we all love America. We all want to bring family wage jobs. We may differ in how we're going to get there, but let's start on where we agree and work our way out. but it's gonna take some time, there's real damage, but the silver lining is that more women and more people are running for office the first time. And they don't look like your traditional members of Congress or members of the state legislature. More people are actively campaigning for individuals for the first time. More people are contributing to political races for the first time. All of that is the seeds of the growth of our democracy. So let's be optimistic about what we're seeing. Let's work hard to fix it in our own individual lives, and that's how you get the So, gentlemen, yes.
Well, I'm beginning to get a little nervous here. I keep hearing you talk about cooperating with the Republicans. All the news that I hear and everybody I talk to says there is no Republican Party now. It's Trump's party.
Yeah.
Now, if Trump is still in power and we take control of both houses, are we going to let Trump keep running us like they are, or are we going to say, no, we're not going to cooperate with the rest of his Trump people? And they aren't Republicans. Those people in Congress and in the Senate are not Republicans. I don't even think they're American.
They're opportunists.
You know,
but I can't see going in and saying, we're gonna go in and cooperate, and Trump is still president, and those toadies are still sitting there doing exactly what he wants, which is not good for us, our kids. And people are in here talking about the poor and, you know, the things that need to be done. But those people that are not, you know, they've been pretty well stuck to them, you know, in, as far as their economic advancements and their educational opportunities. But I don't see enough of those people in here either, and that's bothering me. Why aren't we outreaching to these poor communities and bringing them in and start campaigning with us rather than worried about, you know, what they're, I mean, they have got a bad thing, but if they're ever gonna get any better, they're gonna have to get out there and they're gonna have to work with us.
So a couple of things. I agree about trying to get more people involved, and particularly those who are disadvantaged. Studies show that folks who are poor, who are struggling to find housing, or struggling with healthcare, they are so busy trying to survive, and we've got a great example here, that they don't get involved in politics because they just don't simply have the time or the energy. But it doesn't. And they feel the government is not listening. So why would they want to participate in a process that they think is inherently corrupt? And when I hear somebody saying, I want to live off the grid, I'm like, oh my, you are really concerned about the state, not only of your own, you know, what's happening to you, but the state of, you know, our country. But I don't want you to think that cooperation is giving in. I think we need to cooperate in order to have the best public policy. So I just want to kind of go back to what you're saying. I think there is a danger that there are people in both parties who don't want to cooperate. They want to be overly ideological and dogmatic, and that historically we are electing people who are more conservative or liberal to replace people who are more moderate. So we have to sort of elect people who have that willingness and that who aren't nearly as extreme. But it's tough with gerrymandering. It's tough with the people who have resources to run and some who don't. So it's difficult, but I think we have to try. And I believe if the Democrats take both houses of Congress and there are enough new people elected to Congress, we can start to change the institution from within. I wouldn't be running if I didn't think we can have a positive impact. And all signs that I've seen say that we're moving in that direction. And I think that President Trump is about winning, right? Does he tell us it's about winning? That if Congress, it's about, you won't get tired of winning. That if Congress is able to present him legislation, he'll sign it because he wants to say that he took credit for it. So I think there's a way that we can sort of not do his bidding, but reassert our constitutional authority, and that he'll go along with it. So that's what I'm hoping for. So I don't want you to be nervous.
That's clever.
I wouldn't take it to the bank.
But we have to try. So we've run late, and so I told you we would get most of your questions in. I'm sorry if I didn't get to all of them, because we have to go. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for your questions. We won't always agree, but hopefully we can have these respectful conversations so you can see that, you know, that path forward, and that's about being involved, and you're doing that by spending your Tuesday night with me?
Wednesday.
You know, we've got 86 more days to go, but thank you for 83.